The mahogany dining table stretched between us like an ocean of unspoken expectations, its polished surface reflecting the crystal chandelier that had hung in the Hartwell family dining room for 3 generations. Maya pressed her palms against her thighs, feeling the slight tremor that always came before she spoke truth to power. The folder containing 18 months of research, market analysis, and dreams sat beside her untouched plate of roast beef, as heavy as a stone. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. So, her father Gerald began, carving the meat with surgical precision, each slice falling away from the bone like shed skin. Your mother tells me you have some sort of announcement to make? His voice carried that particular tone reserved for Maya's teenage proclamations about becoming a marine biologist, then a documentary filmmaker, then briefly, memorably, a professional food critic. Maya's mother Patricia smoothed her napkin across her lap, the gesture as rehearsed as everything else in their Westchester home. Darling, you know we support your creativity, but perhaps we should discuss realistic career paths. The Henderson girl just got promoted to associate at Goldman Sachs. The words Maya had practiced in her car, in front of her bathroom mirror, during countless sleepless nights, suddenly felt foreign on her tongue. She reached for the folder, her fingers finding the worn edge where she'd flipped through the pages hundreds of times. I want to start a company. Her younger brother David looked up from his phone, eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. At 19, he possessed the casual confidence that came with being the family's golden child, the one whose business degree at Wharton was already mapped out like a GPS route to success. What kind of company? Patricia asked, though her tone suggested she was humoring a child's fantasy about opening a lemonade stand. Maya opened the folder, revealing the first page of her business plan. The header read, BloomBox, Sustainable Indoor Growing Systems for Urban Food Deserts. She had chosen the font carefully, professional, but not intimidating. The logo she had designed herself, a small green sprout emerging from geometric lines, sat in the corner like a quiet declaration of hope. Indoor vertical farming, Maya said, her voice steadying as she found her rhythm. Specifically, hydroponic systems designed for low-income urban areas where fresh produce is either unavailable or prohibitively expensive. Each BloomBox unit can produce the equivalent of a traditional garden in just 12 square feet, using 90% less water and no soil. Gerald set down his carving knife with deliberate slowness. The sound echoed in the dining room like a gavel. Maya, sweetheart, you majored in environmental science. You're not an engineer. You're not a business person. I've been working with Dr. Rodriguez at Columbia's Urban Agriculture Lab for the past year. We've created a prototype that can feed a family of 4 fresh vegetables year-round for less than $50 a month and operating costs. Patricia reached across the table and patted Maya's hand. The gesture somehow managed to be both loving and dismissive. Darling, you know we support your creativity, but perhaps we should discuss realistic career paths. The Henderson girl just got promoted to associate at Goldman Sachs. Your trust fund is meant for your future, not for experiments.
The word experiments hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Maya felt something shift inside her chest, a familiar tightening that had accompanied every family dinner since she'd graduated college 2 years ago. She thought of Mrs. Chen, the 73-year-old woman who lived 3 floors below her cramped Brooklyn apartment, who had to take 2 buses to reach the nearest grocery store that sold fresh vegetables she could afford. It's not an experiment, Maya said quietly. Food insecurity affects over 38 million Americans. In urban food deserts, a head of lettuce can cost $4, if it's available at all. Meanwhile, the same lettuce can be grown hydroponically for 30 cents. David finally looked up from his phone completely, something flickering in his eyes that might have been interest. How much capital are you talking about? Maya flipped several pages, revealing detailed financial projections, manufacturing costs, and distribution strategies. Initial funding of $200,000 would allow us to manufacture 50 units, establish partnerships with community centers in 3 major cities, and prove market viability. The silence that followed felt geological in its weight. Gerald resumed carving the roast, each slice now carrying an edge of finality. Patricia sipped her wine,
her lipstick leaving a perfect crescent on the crystal rim. "Maya," her father said eventually, not looking up from his task, "your heart is in the right place. It always has been. But business isn't about good intentions. It's about profit margins, scalability, market penetration. You're talking about serving people who, by definition, don't have money to spend." "That's exactly the point," Maya said, her voice rising slightly. "There are grants, subsidies, municipal programs. The city of Detroit just allocated $15 million for urban agriculture initiatives. Boston has a food justice task force. This isn't charity, it's social entrepreneurship." Patricia set down her wine glass with a soft clink. "Darling, we always have you as our dreamer. Remember when you wanted to save the whales, and then it was documenting climate change in Alaska? Now it's vegetables." The way she said vegetables made it sound like a childhood phase involving finger painting. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, but pressed on. "I've spent 2 years researching this. I have letters of interest from 12 community organizations. Dr. Rodriguez says the technology is revolutionary. Our prototype has a 94% success rate." "Letters of interest aren't purchase orders," Gerald said, finally looking up at his daughter. His eyes held the particular sadness of a parent watching their child chase impossible things. "And revolutionary technology doesn't matter if you can't manufacture it at scale or distribute it profitably." Maya turned to the financial section of her plan, pages dense with numbers she'd calculated and recalculated until they lived in her dreams. Break-even analysis shows profitability by month 18. Government contracts alone could generate government contracts. Gerald's laugh was short and sharp. "Maya, do you have any idea how long it takes to get a government contract? How much lobbying, how much political capital, how much sheer bureaucratic persistence? You're 24 years old. You've never run so much as a lemonade stand." The comparison to a lemonade stand struck Maya like a physical blow. She closed the folder slowly, her hands suddenly steady with resignation. Around the table, her family returned to their dinner, as if the conversation had been about weekend plans or the weather. The chandelier continued its quiet sparkling above them, casting prismatic light across the mahogany table that had witnessed 3 generations of Hartwell family decisions. "I just thought that maybe you'd want to invest in something that could make a difference." Maya reached across the table again, squeezing Maya's hand with genuine affection. "Oh, sweetheart, we do want you to make a difference. That's why we're encouraging you to think practically. Maybe you could work for an established agricultural company, or perhaps nonprofit work. There are so many ways to help people without risking everything on an untested idea." David cleared his throat, still scrolling through his phone. "Actually, vertical farming is getting pretty hot. There's this company called Plenty that just raised $200 million in Series B funding." Maya's head snapped up. "You know about Plenty?" "Yeah, they're growing leafy greens in vertical towers. Pretty cool tech, actually. But they're targeting premium markets, high-end restaurants, upscale grocery chains. Nobody's really cracking the low-income market because..." He shrugged, returning to his phone. "Well, because poor people can't pay premium prices for premium vegetables." "Exactly," Maya said, leaning forward. "That's what makes BloomBox different. It's not about premium produce. It's about accessible produce. Food as a human right, not a luxury good." Gerald wiped his mouth with his napkin, a gesture that somehow conveyed finality. "Maya, I admire your idealism. I really do. But business isn't about human rights. It's about supply and demand, profit and loss. If this idea was viable, someone with real experience and real capital would already be doing it." The words settled over Maya like a shroud. She looked around the table at her family, successful, practical people who had built comfortable lives through conventional wisdom and careful choices. They loved her, she knew that. But they loved her the way one loves a beautiful bird that insists on flying toward windows, with affection tempered by the constant fear of inevitable collision with reality. Maya closed her folder completely and set it on the empty chair beside her. Through the dining room's French doors, she could see the gardens her mother tended with religious devotion, perfectly manicured beds of roses and hydrangeas that required weekly visits from a landscaping service to maintain their magazine-worthy appearance. The irony wasn't lost on her, that in a house surrounded by ornamental gardens, the idea of growing food for people who needed it most was considered impractical. "I understand," Maya said, finally, though understanding and acceptance were vastly different things. "I just wanted you to know what I've been working on." The dinner resumed its normal rhythm. David sharing updates from college, Patricia discussing the upcoming charity gala she was organizing, Gerald recounting a particularly satisfying victory in court. Maya participated when directly asked, but her mind drifted to the prototype BloomBox sitting in her Brooklyn apartment, its LED lights cycling through their programmed spectrum, nurturing a crop of cherry tomatoes that would be ready for harvest in just 10 days. After dinner, as the family migrated to the living room for their traditional Sunday evening routine of half-watching television while scrolling through their phones, Maya excused herself to the bathroom. She stood in the powder room that was larger than her entire apartment kitchen, staring at her reflection in the gilt-framed mirror. Her dark hair was pulled back in the neat bun she wore to family dinners. Her dress was the conservative navy blue that met her mother's unspoken standards for appropriate attire, but her eyes held something her family hadn't seen. Not defiance exactly, but a quiet certainty that felt new even to herself. She pulled out her phone and opened her email, scrolling to a message she'd received 3 days earlier but hadn't had the courage to open. The subject line read, "Shark Tank casting update, urgent response required." Her finger hovered over the message for a long moment before she finally tapped it open. "Dear Maya, congratulations. Your BloomBox application has been selected for final round consideration. We need your response by midnight tonight regarding filming availability next week. If selected, taping would occur Tuesday, with potential air date within 60 days. Please confirm your interest and availability immediately."
She glanced at the timestamp on the email. It had arrived at 2:47 p.m., just as she'd been sitting down to Sunday dinner with her family. While her father was explaining why her business plan was impractical, while her mother was comparing her dreams to childhood phases, while her brother was casually dismissing the market she'd spent 2 years researching, the producers of America's most watched entrepreneurship show were waiting for her response. Maya typed quickly, "Yes, I'm interested. I'm available. Thank you for this opportunity." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then stared at her phone as if it might immediately ring with life-changing news. Through the powder room's small window, she could see her father's Mercedes in the circular driveway, gleaming under the landscape lighting like a symbol of everything her family valued: reliability, status, the kind of success that could be measured in German engineering and premium leather interiors. But Maya wasn't thinking about Mercedes sedans or family expectations anymore. She was thinking about Mrs. Chen, counting out exact change for wilted vegetables at the corner bodega. She was thinking about the kids she'd met during her research in East Cleveland, whose idea of fresh fruit was whatever was currently on sale at the gas station. She was thinking about Dr. Rodriguez's words from their last meeting. "Maya, someone needs to bridge the gap between what's possible and what's profitable. Someone needs to prove that feeding people and making money aren't mutually exclusive." When Maya returned to the living room, her family was engaged in a familiar scene. David showing his parents something on his laptop, probably related to his internship applications or course selections. They looked up as she entered, their faces wearing the particular expression reserved for family members who've been gently corrected and are expected to accept that correction gracefully. "Feeling better, sweetheart?" Patricia asked, patting the couch cushion beside her. "Much better," Maya said, settling into her designated spot. On the television, a nature documentary played scenes of monarch butterflies migrating thousands of miles to reach their breeding grounds. The narrator's voice was soothing, authoritative, as he described the mysterious navigation systems that allowed these fragile creatures to find their way across vast distances to places they'd never been. Maya watched the butterflies and thought about navigation systems, about finding your way to places you've never been, about the difference between fragility and resilience. Her phone buzzed with a confirmation email from the Shark Tank production team, containing forms to fill out, logistics to arrange, and a reminder that she was prohibited from discussing her selection with anyone until after the episode aired. She slipped her phone back into her purse and focused on the monarchs on screen, their orange and black wings carrying them toward an uncertain but instinctively known destination.
Around her, her family's voices blended into comfortable background noise, discussing practical things, predictable things, safe things. Maya nodded and smiled and responded when appropriate, but part of her was already somewhere else entirely. Standing in front of 5 successful entrepreneurs, explaining why feeding people was the most profitable thing any business could ever do. She could almost feel the studio lights, warm and bright as the LED arrays in her prototype, illuminating not just her face, but the possibility of a world where good food wasn't a luxury, where innovation served necessity, where a 24-year-old environmental science major could prove that sometimes the most revolutionary ideas come from the most personal places. The monarch butterflies continued their journey across the television screen, and Maya Hartwell began hers. Maya's alarm buzzed at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before she actually needed to wake up. She discovered that those extra 3 minutes of knowing she could still sleep made getting up somehow easier, a small psychological trick that felt like winning a tiny victory before her feet even touched the floor. Her studio apartment in Prospect Heights was exactly 387 square feet.
Not including the bathroom that was so small she had to step into the hallway to fully open the door. The BloomBox prototype occupied the corner where a normal person might put a dining table. Under its LED canopy, rows of butter lettuce grew in neat formation, their roots threading through a nutrient solution that Maya mixed fresh every Tuesday and Friday. The system hummed quietly, a sound that had become as familiar as her own breathing. Sometimes she caught herself timing her inhalations to match the pump's rhythm. She'd named the first successful prototype Agnes, after her grandmother who'd grown victory gardens during World War II. Agnes had died when Maya was 7, but she still remembered the old woman's hands, perpetually stained with soil, coaxing tomatoes from seemingly impossible places. A fire escape in the Bronx, a windowsill barely 6 inches wide, the small patch of earth behind her apartment building where she'd somehow convinced roses and vegetables to coexist. "Good morning, Agnes," Maya whispered to the growing system, checking the pH levels displayed on the small monitor. 6.2, perfect for leafy greens. The cherry tomatoes she'd started 3 weeks ago were beginning to show their first true leaves, tiny and impossibly green against the white growing medium. Maya's morning routine had become a meditation in efficiency. Coffee brewed in a French press while she checked her email on her laptop, which lived on a folding card table that served as both desk and kitchen counter. Shower in exactly 7 minutes, including the 2 minutes it took for the ancient water heater to decide whether it felt like providing hot water. Dress in what she'd started thinking of as her uniform. Dark jeans, comfortable flats, and one of 3 blazers that could transition from job interviews to coffee shop meetings to the occasional networking event where she felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. Her phone showed 17 new emails, but only one that made her pulse quicken. Dr. Rodriguez had sent photos from the latest test installation at the community center in Harlem. The BloomBox they'd installed 6 weeks ago was producing enough fresh greens to supply the center's after-school program with salads twice a week. The kids in the photos were grinning, holding leaves of lettuce and spinach like trophies. "Maya," Dr. Rodriguez had written, "Carmen says the kids are asking when they can take plants home to their families. I think we're onto something bigger than we realized." Maya smiled, despite herself, then immediately felt the familiar twist of anxiety. Dr. Rodriguez believed in the project, the community center wanted more units, the kids were excited about fresh vegetables, but belief and want didn't translate to purchase orders. She had $1,700 left in her business checking account, enough to pay rent for 1 more month and keep Agnes running for maybe 6 weeks. Her phone buzzed with a text from her college roommate Jessica. "Coffee before I head to the office? Need to hear about Sunday dinner drama." Maya had made the mistake of calling Jessica after leaving her parents' house, needing to hear a voice that didn't think her business plan was an adorable phase. Jessica worked in marketing at a sustainable fashion startup and understood the particular brand of crazy that came with trying to build something meaningful in a world that mostly rewarded safe choices.
They met at their usual spot, a coffee shop in Park Slope that had started as a joke between them. At least someone's making money selling overpriced consumables to people who care about the environment. Maya ordered her standard oat milk latte. Jessica got something that involved adaptogenic mushrooms and cost nearly $8. So, Jessica said, settling into the wobbly table by the window, on a scale of 1 to, "Sweetie, maybe you should consider law school," how bad was it? Maya stirred her latte and watched the foam swirl. My dad actually used the phrase lemonade stand. Ouch, Jessica winced sympathetically. And your mom? Suggested I look into nonprofit work. You know, where I can help people without all this messy business stuff getting in the way. Jessica shook her head. I love your parents, but they have absolutely zero imagination. They can't see past the idea that business has to be either profitable or meaningful, never both. Maya pulled out her phone and showed Jessica the photos from Dr. Rodriguez. Look at these kids, Jess. Look how excited they are about lettuce. When's the last time you saw anyone get that excited about vegetables? Jessica scrolled through the images, her expression softening. This is incredible, Maya. But also, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. How are you paying for this? The equipment, the installations, your rent? The question Maya had been avoiding landed with its usual thud. I'm not, really. Dr. Rodriguez got grant money for the first few installations. My rent comes from the tutoring I do online. Everything else? She shrugged. Credit cards, mostly. Jessica set down her phone and fixed Maya with the look she'd perfected during their senior year when she'd had to stage what she'd called a reality intervention about Maya's habit of taking on more causes than she could actually manage. Maya, you know I believe in this. You know I think you're brilliant and determined and all the things that successful entrepreneurs are supposed to be. But you can't build a business on credit cards and hope. I know that, Maya said, though her voice lacked conviction. I'm applying for grants, reaching out to investors, trying to get meetings with impact funds. And in the meantime? Maya stared out the window at the stream of people heading to work, each carrying the particular purposefulness of someone who knew where they were going and why they belonged there. She envied Bet's certainty, that sense of forward motion that didn't require constant justification to skeptical relatives or concerned friends. In the meantime, I keep working. I keep believing that someone, somewhere, will see what I see. Jessica reached across the table and squeezed Maya's hand. I see what you see, but seeing it and funding it are two different things. Have you thought about maybe starting smaller, getting a job in the industry, learning how real companies operate? The suggestion wasn't new. Maya had heard variations of it from her parents, from well-meaning professors, from the 3 venture capital firms that had politely declined to meet with her. Get experience first. Learn the business from the inside. Understand how the industry really works before trying to disrupt it. But Maya had spent 2 years researching the industry, and what she'd learned was that most agricultural technology companies were focused on maximizing yields for large-scale commercial farming, not democratizing access to fresh food for urban communities. The expertise she needed didn't exist in boardrooms. It existed in places like Mrs. Chen's kitchen, where every dollar spent on food was a calculation between necessity and want. I've thought about it, Maya said carefully, but I'm not trying to build a better version of what already exists. I'm trying to build something completely different. Jessica nodded, though Maya could see the worry in her eyes. They'd been friends long enough for Maya to recognize the expression. It was the same look Jessica had worn when Maya decided to spend her spring break junior year documenting water quality issues in Flint, Michigan, instead of joining the rest of their friends in Cabo. After Jessica left for work, Maya walked back to her apartment through Prospect Park, taking the long route that passed the community garden where she'd first started thinking seriously about urban agriculture. The garden was a collection of small plots tended by local residents, a patchwork of vegetables and flowers that somehow thrived despite the city's concrete embrace. Mrs. Patel was watering her tomato plants, her sari tucked up to avoid the morning dew. She'd been one of Maya's first informal interviews, explaining how she'd grown up on a farm in Gujarat but hadn't tasted a properly ripe tomato in Brooklyn for 15 years. The ones in the store, they look like tomatoes, but they taste like disappointment. Maya paused by the garden's fence, watching Mrs. Patel tend her plants with the focused attention of someone for whom growing food was both memory and necessity. This is what her parents didn't understand, what the venture capital firms couldn't quantify. The way people's faces changed when they talked about fresh food that actually tasted like food. The way children who lived on processed convenience store meals suddenly became curious about where vegetables came from when they could watch them grow under LED lights in their community center. Back in her apartment, Maya opened her laptop and stared at the Shark Tank confirmation email she'd received the night before. The production assistant had called that morning with more details. She'd need to be in Los Angeles by Monday. Filming was scheduled for Tuesday, and she'd have exactly 4 minutes to explain her business to 5 investors who'd heard every variation of every entrepreneurial dream imaginable.
4 minutes to explain 2 years of research, to justify her belief that feeding people was the most important work anyone could do, to convince successful business people that profit and purpose could coexist in a way her own family couldn't imagine. Maya looked at Agnes, humming quietly in the corner, her lettuce leaves catching the natural light from the window. The LED array would turn on automatically at noon, providing the precise spectrum of light needed for photosynthesis, timed to maximize growth while minimizing energy consumption. Every aspect of the system was designed with efficiency in mind: water usage, electricity consumption, space requirements, maintenance needs. She'd spent months calculating the exact specifications that would make BloomBox profitable at scale while remaining accessible to communities with limited resources. The math worked. The technology worked. The market need was undeniable. But Maya was learning that business wasn't just about numbers and technology and market need. It was about faith. The faith of investors willing to risk money on unproven ideas. The faith of customers willing to try something new. The faith of families willing to believe their daughters could build something meaningful in a world that often rewarded cynicism over hope. Her phone rang, jolting her from her thoughts. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize with a Los Angeles area code. Maya Hartwell?
Yes?
This is Marcus from the Shark Tank production team. I wanted to confirm your travel arrangements and go over the filming schedule. Are you still planning to be here Monday? Maya looked around her tiny apartment, at Agnes growing steadily in the corner, at the folding table that served as her office, at the stack of rejection letters from investors who'd politely explained why her idea wasn't commercial enough, scalable enough, profitable enough to warrant their consideration. She said, "Yes, I'll be there." "Great, I'm emailing you the final details now. One thing to remember, the investors are going to want to see clear revenue projections and a path to profitability. They're not interested in charity projects, no matter how well-intentioned." Maya almost laughed. Everyone, it seemed, wanted to remind her that business wasn't charity, as if caring about people and making money were fundamentally incompatible concepts. "I understand," she said. "BloomBox isn't a charity project. It's a business designed to solve a real problem while generating sustainable profits." "Perfect. That's exactly what they want to hear. We'll see you Monday." After hanging up, Maya sat in the quiet of her apartment, listening to Agnes hum and the distant sounds of Brooklyn waking up outside her window. She thought about Sunday dinner with her family, about their loving concern for her impractical dreams. She thought about Jessica's worry, about Dr. Rodriguez's excitement, about the kids in Harlem eating fresh salad for the first time in their lives. She thought about Mrs. Chen, 3 floors below, who would spend her afternoon taking 2 buses to buy overpriced vegetables that traveled 3,000 miles to reach a grocery store that charged premium prices for produce that was neither fresh nor nutritious.
And she thought about 5 successful entrepreneurs who, in less than a week, would listen to her explain why feeding people was the most profitable thing any business could ever do. Maya opened her laptop and began typing her pitch notes, her fingers finding the rhythm of someone who knew exactly where she was going, even if everyone else thought she was lost.
The flight to Los Angeles was Maya's first time in first class, courtesy of the Shark Tank production budget, and she spent the entire 5 hours feeling like she was pretending to be someone else. The flight attendant kept offering her champagne and warm nuts, treating her like the kind of person who belonged in the front of the airplane. Maya sipped ginger ale and reviewed her pitch notes, trying not to think about the credit card bills piling up on her desk back in Brooklyn. The hotel near the studio was the kind of place Maya had only seen in movies. Marble lobby, fresh orchids on every surface, a concierge who somehow made "How can I assist you?" sound like poetry. Maya's room had a view of the Hollywood Hills and a bathroom larger than her entire apartment. She set her prototype BloomBox components on the desk next to the window and felt the surreal disconnect of watching tiny lettuce seedlings grow under LED lights while Los Angeles sprawled endlessly below. She'd packed Agnes's younger sibling a second-generation prototype that incorporated all the improvements she'd learned from 18 months of testing. The new model was sleeker, more efficient, easier to operate. She'd also brought her laptop with the business plan that had taken her 6 months to write, financial projections she'd calculated and recalculated until the numbers lived in her dreams, and a folder full of photographs showing BloomBox installations producing fresh food in community centers across New York. The night before filming, Maya couldn't sleep. She stood at the hotel window at 2 a.m., watching the city's lights stretch to the horizon, and called Dr. Rodriguez. "Maya, is everything okay? It's 5 in the morning here." "I'm sorry," she said, though she wasn't really. What if I'm wrong? What if my parents were right, and I'm just a dreamer chasing something impossible?" Dr. Rodriguez's laugh was warm even through the phone connection. "Maya, do you remember the first time you came to my lab? You walked in and told me you wanted to end food insecurity in urban America using hydroponic technology. Do you remember what I said?" Maya smiled despite her anxiety. "You said I was either brilliant or completely insane, and you wanted to find out which. And what did we discover? Both?" Exactly. The best entrepreneurs are always both. Brilliance without a little insanity is just academic theory. Insanity without brilliance is just chaos. You have both, Maya. Trust that. After hanging up, Maya pulled up the photos on her phone from the community center installation. There was 8-year-old Marcus grinning as he held a head of lettuce bigger than his face. There was Mrs. Washington, the center director, explaining to a group of parents how the BloomBox could produce fresh vegetables year-round for less than $50 a month. There was the teenager Aisha, who'd asked if she could start her own growing operation in her family's apartment. These weren't theoretical customers or market segments. They were real people who'd been served by a system that treated fresh food as a luxury rather than a necessity. Maya thought about Marcus eating iceberg lettuce for the first time and declaring it crunchy water, then tasting butter lettuce from the BloomBox and asking if they could grow the good kind at home too. The production studio was smaller than Maya had expected, but the energy was unmistakable. Cameras everywhere, lighting rigs that could illuminate a small city, and a constant buzz of crew members moving with the purposeful chaos of people who knew exactly what they were doing. Maya's stomach fluttered with the particular combination of excitement and terror that came with standing at the edge of something that could change everything.
The other entrepreneurs waiting to pitch were a diverse group, but Maya noticed they all shared something she recognized: the slightly manic gleam of people who'd spent months or years believing in ideas that other people thought were impossible. There was Jake, who'd invented a device that turned ocean plastic into building materials. Sarah had created a subscription service for personalized vitamin supplements. Marcus, a different Marcus than the 8-year-old lettuce enthusiast, had developed an app that helped people find and share community resources. "First time?" asked Priya, a woman about Maya's age whose startup focused on biodegradable packaging made from mushroom-based materials. "Is it that obvious?"
Priya grinned. You keep checking your presentation materials. I did the same thing my first time. Been on 3 entrepreneurship shows now. You get used to the adrenaline. Third time? How did the other 2 go? Got deals on 2 of them, but the companies didn't work out. Turns out getting investment is just the beginning. The real work starts after the cameras stop rolling. Maya felt a flutter of something between hope and panic. She'd been so focused on getting to this moment that she hadn't fully considered what would come after. If she got a deal, if someone invested in BloomBox, she'd need to scale manufacturing, establish distribution channels, hire employees, navigate regulations she probably didn't even know existed yet. Any advice? Maya asked. Be yourself, but be the best version of yourself. They can smell bullshit from across the studio, but they also invest in people, not just businesses. Tell them why you care, not just what you do. A production assistant called Maya's name, and suddenly she was walking toward the set, carrying her prototype components and 2 years of dreams. The famous doors opened, and there they were, 5 of the most successful entrepreneurs in America, sitting behind their curved desk like judges in a courtroom where the verdict was measured in dollars and equity percentages. Maya had watched hundreds of Shark Tank episodes, but being in the studio felt different than seeing it on television. The sharks looked simultaneously more human and more intimidating than she had expected. Mark Cuban was shorter than she had imagined, but radiated the intense focus of someone accustomed to making million-dollar decisions in seconds. Barbara Corcoran had kind eyes, but the posture of someone who'd built a real estate empire through sheer force of will. "Whenever you're ready," called the producer from behind the cameras. Maya took a breath and began the pitch she'd practiced until it lived in her muscle memory. "Hi, Sharks. My name is Maya Hartwell, and I'm seeking $200,000 in exchange for 10% equity in BloomBox, the first scalable indoor growing system designed specifically for urban food deserts." She gestured to her prototype, which she had assembled on the small table provided. Every year, 38 million Americans struggle with food insecurity, while urban food deserts make fresh produce either unavailable or prohibitively expensive. BloomBox changes that by enabling communities to grow their own fresh vegetables using 90% less water than traditional farming, no soil, and just 12 square feet of space. Maya demonstrated the system, showing how the nutrient solutions circulated through the growing medium, how the LED lights provided the exact spectrum needed for photosynthesis, how the automated controls made growing food as simple as programming a coffee maker.
Each BloomBox unit can produce enough fresh vegetables to feed a family of 4 year-round, with operating costs of less than $50 per month. We've tested the system in community centers across New York, and the results speak for themselves. She shared the photographs: kids eating fresh salads, families learning to grow their own food, and community leaders excited about the possibility of local food production. The sharks listened intently, occasionally exchanging glances that Maya couldn't read. "What's your background?" asked Kevin O'Leary, leaning forward with the expression of someone evaluating a stock purchase. "I have a degree in environmental science from Columbia, and I've spent the past 2 years working with Dr. Maria Rodriguez at Columbia's Urban Agriculture Lab, developing and testing this technology." "But no business experience," O'Leary said. It wasn't a question. "No formal business experience," Maya admitted. "But I've spent 2 years researching the market, developing relationships with community partners, and proving the technology works. I know this market because I've lived in it, worked in it, and seen firsthand how it fails the people who need fresh food most." Lori Greiner smiled encouragingly. "I love the mission, Maya. But let's talk numbers. You're asking for $200,000. What are your sales so far?" Maya felt the familiar twist in her stomach. "We don't have traditional sales yet. Our focus has been on proving the technology and establishing community partnerships. We've installed 15 units in community centers and schools, all funded through grants and pilot programs." "So 0 revenue," O'Leary said. "0 traditional revenue," Maya corrected. "But we have letters of intent from 12 community organizations representing over 3,000 families. The city of Detroit has expressed interest in a municipal contract worth potentially $15 million over 5 years.
Mark Cuban leaned back in his chair. Letters of intent aren't purchase orders. Municipal contracts take forever and aren't guaranteed. What's your plan for actual paying customers? Maya had anticipated this question, but hearing it in the studio felt different than practicing her response in her hotel room. The business model works on 3 levels. Community organizations purchase units directly, either through their own budgets or grant funding. Individual families can buy units through a rent-to-own program that costs less per month than their current grocery bills for fresh produce, and municipalities can purchase units in bulk for housing projects and community centers. "What does it cost to manufacture each unit?" asked Barbara Corcoran. "Current manufacturing cost is $475 per unit. At scale, we project that dropping to around $300. And you sell them for $899 retail. Community organizations get a discount, $699. Robert Herjavec was running calculations on his tablet. "So your margins are decent, but you need significant volume to justify the investment. How do you scale this without massive capital requirements?" Maya pulled out her financial projections. Phase 1 involves partnering with existing community organizations who already have grant funding for food security programs. This creates immediate demand without requiring individual consumer education. Phase 2 expands into direct-to-consumer sales through the rent-to-own model. Phase 3 targets municipal contracts and corporate social responsibility programs.
But Maya, Lori said gently, you're essentially asking us to invest in a social mission that happens to be structured as a business. What's to stop a larger agricultural company from creating their own version and undercutting your prices? Maya felt her pulse quicken. This was the question she'd lost sleep over, the concern that had made her father compare her business plan to a lemonade stand. 2 things. First, our patent-pending technology specifically optimizes for the constraints of low-income urban environments: low energy consumption, minimal maintenance, maximum nutritional output per square foot. The larger agricultural companies are focused on commercial farming efficiency, not household-level food security. She paused, knowing the second part of her answer was riskier but more honest. Second, this isn't just about technology, it's about trust. Communities experiencing food insecurity have been promised solutions before that didn't materialize or didn't serve their actual needs. BloomBox works because we've spent 2 years building relationships, understanding the real barriers, and designing specifically for the communities we serve. Kevin O'Leary leaned forward with the smile of someone who'd found a weak point. That's very touching, Maya, but business isn't about trust. It's about competitive advantage and defensible market position. What happens when Amazon decides to sell hydroponic growing systems for half your price? Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to stay calm. Amazon already sells hydroponic systems, Mr. O'Leary. You can buy them right now for anywhere from $50 to $5,000. But Amazon doesn't sell support systems, community education, maintenance services, or financing options for families earning minimum wage. Amazon doesn't install systems in community centers and teach 8-year-olds how to grow lettuce. Amazon doesn't partner with local organizations to address food insecurity as a comprehensive community issue. The studio fell quiet. Maya could hear her own heartbeat and the distant hum of camera equipment. She'd either just made a compelling argument or completely torpedoed her chances by lecturing Kevin O'Leary about the limitations of e-commerce. Mark Cuban broke the silence. "You're passionate, and the mission is admirable, but I'm concerned about scalability. You're talking about a business that requires significant handholding for each customer, community-by-community expansion, and markets that have limited purchasing power. That's not a recipe for the kind of growth that justifies a $2 million valuation." Maya's throat felt dry. "With respect, Mr. Cuban, I think we're defining growth differently. Yes, BloomBox requires more customer support than selling widgets online. But we're not just selling widgets. We're solving a fundamental problem that affects millions of people and costs billions in healthcare expenses related to nutrition-based diseases. The total addressable market for urban food security solutions is over $40 billion annually. But how much of that $40 billion is actually accessible to your target customers?" Barbara asked. Maya pulled out another folder, the one she'd hoped she wouldn't need, full of statistics about food spending in low-income communities.
Low-income families spend a higher percentage of their income on food than affluent families, but they have less access to quality options. The average family in a food desert spends $300 more per year on food than families with grocery store access, while getting lower nutritional value. BloomBox doesn't just save money, it improves health outcomes, which saves money on healthcare costs related to nutrition-based diseases. Robert nodded thoughtfully. The social impact is clear, but what about competition from nonprofits? If the need is as urgent as you say, why wouldn't foundations just fund nonprofit organizations to address this? Maya smiled for the first time since entering the studio. They do, Mr. Herjavec, and that's exactly why BloomBox works as a business model. Nonprofits get grants to address specific problems for specific periods. When the grant money runs out, the programs disappear. But businesses create sustainable solutions that grow stronger over time. Communities need both immediate relief and long-term capacity building. BloomBox provides both.
Lori was taking notes on her tablet. Maya, you clearly believe in this, and you've done your homework, but I'm still concerned about the execution. How do you plan to manage customer service, maintenance, training, and support for customers across the country when you're currently a one-person operation? Maya had been dreading this question because the honest answer exposed just how much she was asking the Sharks to bet on potential rather than proven performance. The first investment funds would go toward hiring 3 key positions: an operations manager with community organization experience, a technical support specialist to handle maintenance and training, and a business development person to manage municipal and corporate partnerships. I'd continue handling product development and strategic partnerships. So you're asking us to invest in an idea, not a proven business, Kevin said. I'm asking you to invest in a proven solution to a massive problem, Maya replied. The technology works, the market need is documented, the community partnerships are established. What we need is capital to scale operations. Mark Cuban was quiet for a long moment, then looked directly at Maya. Here's what I like. You understand your market better than most entrepreneurs understand theirs. You've done the groundwork, you've tested the product, you've built relationships. Here's what concerns me. You're trying to build a business that requires you to educate your customers, support your customers, and change the way your customers think about food production. That's 3 different businesses wrapped into one. Maya felt the conversation slipping away from her, but pressed on. Mr. Cuban, with respect, every transformative business requires customer education. Tesla had to teach people to think differently about cars. Airbnb had to teach people to think differently about accommodation. Netflix had to teach people to think differently about entertainment. BloomBox is teaching people to think differently about where their food comes from. But Tesla didn't target customers who couldn't afford cars, Kevin pointed out. Airbnb didn't focus on people who couldn't afford hotels. You're targeting a market segment with limited disposable income and trying to sell them a product they don't currently understand. That's extraordinarily challenging. Maya looked around the studio at 5 successful entrepreneurs who'd each built businesses by identifying problems and creating solutions. She thought about her parents' dining room, about Jessica's worried expression, about Dr. Rodriguez's encouragement, about 8-year-old Marcus holding his first head of fresh lettuce. You're right, it is extraordinarily challenging, but that's exactly why it needs to be done. Easy problems get solved quickly. Hard problems create sustainable competitive advantages for the companies brave enough to tackle them. Barbara smiled. I admire your determination, Maya, and I think BloomBox could make a real difference, but I don't think you're ready for the kind of investment you're seeking. I'm out. Maya's stomach dropped, but she nodded respectfully. Thank you for your consideration, Miss Corcoran. Robert was next. Maya, I love the mission, but I agree with Barbara. You need more business experience and proven revenue streams before you're ready for institutional investment. I'm out. 2 down, 3 to go. Maya could feel sweat on her palms despite the studio's air conditioning. Lori looked genuinely conflicted. This is tough, Maya. I believe in what you're doing, and I think there's a market for it, but I'm concerned about the complexity of scaling this kind of business. You're not just manufacturing and selling products, you're building community relationships, providing ongoing support, and essentially creating a social movement. That requires a very specific skill set and enormous amounts of time and energy. I don't think $200,000 is enough to do this properly. I'm out.
3 down. Maya looked at Mark Cuban and Kevin O'Leary, trying to read their expressions.
Cuban was leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled, looking like someone working through a complex problem. O'Leary was watching her with the clinical interest of someone calculating risk-reward ratios. "Maya," Cuban said finally, "I'm going to tell you something that might not be what you want to hear, but it's what I think you need to hear. You have a good product, solving a real problem for an underserved market. That's the foundation of every successful business. But you're trying to be a technology company, a social service organization, and a community development nonprofit all at the same time. That's not focus, that's confusion." Maya felt her last hope beginning to evaporate, but Cuban wasn't finished. "However," he continued, "I've been in situations where everyone told me my business model was too complicated, too risky, too focused on markets that other people thought weren't worth serving. Sometimes the businesses that look impossible to everyone else are the ones that create the most value." Maya's heart began beating faster. "I'll make you an offer," Cuban said. $200,000 for 30% equity, but with conditions. You focus exclusively on the direct-to-consumer market for the first 2 years. No community partnerships, no municipal contracts, no grant-funded installations. Prove you can build a sustainable business selling BloomBox units to individual customers who pay full price. Once you demonstrate profitability in the direct market, we can expand into the social impact stuff. Maya felt the studio spinning slightly. Cuban was offering exactly the investment she'd asked for, but requiring her to abandon everything that made BloomBox meaningful to her. Selling growing systems to people who could afford them was just another consumer electronics business. The whole point of BloomBox was serving communities that couldn't access fresh food any other way. Kevin O'Leary leaned forward. "Mark, I think you're being too generous. Maya, I'll give you $200,000 for 40% equity and no restrictions on your business model. But I want to see quarterly profitability within 18 months, or I take control of the company." Maya looked between the two remaining sharks, trying to process offers that felt both validation and betrayal. Cuban's offer would fund her business but gut its mission. O'Leary's offer preserved her vision but came with terms that could destroy her control of the company she'd built. "I need a moment to think," Maya said. "You have 30 seconds, O'Leary replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Maya closed her eyes and thought about Mrs. Chen, counting out exact change for wilted vegetables. She thought about the kids in Harlem, excited about growing their own food. She thought about her parents' dining room, where dreams were gently discouraged in favor of practical choices. She thought about Agnes, humming quietly in her apartment, growing perfect lettuce that no one was paying for yet. "Mr. Cuban," she said, opening her eyes, "I appreciate your offer, but BloomBox only makes sense as a solution to food insecurity. Without that mission, it's just another hydroponic system competing with dozens of others already on the market." Cuban nodded, unsurprised. "Then I'm out." Maya turned to O'Leary, her last remaining option. "Mr. O'Leary, your terms are aggressive, but if you truly believe BloomBox can be profitable while serving communities that need it most, I accept your offer. $200,000 for 40% equity, with quarterly profitability targets beginning in month 18. O'Leary grinned and stood up. "You've got a deal." The handshake felt surreal, like shaking hands with her own future. Maya had gotten her investment, but at the cost of giving up majority control of her company to a man who measured success solely in financial returns. As she walked off the set, carrying her prototype and a deal that felt like victory and compromise, Maya wondered if she'd just saved BloomBox or sold its soul. The drive back to Maya's hotel felt like floating through someone else's life. She sat in the back of the Uber, staring at her phone, where 17 missed calls from Dr. Rodriguez waited alongside text messages from Jessica that progressed from, "How did it go?" to "Call me immediately," to "I'm assuming you're either celebrating or crying. Either way, call me." Maya didn't know which she was doing. Kevin O'Leary's business card sat in her purse like a winning lottery ticket she wasn't sure she wanted to cash. $200,000 in funding, but 40% of her company gone to someone who'd made it clear he saw BloomBox as a profit opportunity, not a mission to address food insecurity. Her phone buzzed with a call from her mother. "Maya, sweetheart, how did it go? Your father and I have been thinking about you all day." The irony wasn't lost on Maya that her parents, who dismissed her business plan over Sunday dinner, were now eager to hear about her television appearance. "I got a deal, Mom. Kevin O'Leary invested $200,000. The silence on the other end stretched, long enough for Maya to wonder if the call had dropped. "Maya," said her mother finally, That's wonderful. We're so proud of you. Your father is going to be beside himself. Kevin O'Leary, we watch him on television." Maya almost laughed at the way her mother's voice changed when she said O'Leary's name, the same reverent tone she used when discussing the neighbors who'd bought a house in the Hamptons. Success, it seemed, was much more palatable when it came with celebrity endorsement and television coverage. "Thanks, Mom. I'll call you when I get back to New York. I'm still processing everything." "Of course, darling. We'll have to celebrate when you're home. Your father wants to take you to dinner at the club." After hanging up, Maya stared out the window at Los Angeles, sliding by in the afternoon traffic. The city felt impossibly bright and optimistic. All palm trees and possibilities, nothing like the gray November reality waiting for her back in Brooklyn. She thought about her parents' sudden enthusiasm for her impractical business plan and wondered how much of entrepreneurship was just timing, being dismissed until the moment you weren't, being naive until someone with money decided you were visionary. Back in her hotel room, Maya called Dr. Rodriguez. "Maya, I've been waiting to hear from you all day. How did it go?" Maya sat on the bed next to her prototype, which looked suddenly small and inadequate compared to the magnitude of what had just happened. "I got an offer. Kevin O'Leary, $200,000 for 40% equity." "That's incredible. Congratulations. You must be thrilled."
Maya picked up one of the lettuce seedlings from her prototype, its roots threading through the growing medium like delicate white lace. "I should be thrilled. I am thrilled. But also, Dr. Rodriguez, he doesn't care about food insecurity. He doesn't care about community partnerships or serving low-income families. He just sees a product that could be profitable." Dr. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. "Maya, do you remember what I told you the first day you came to my lab? About the difference between research and impact? That research without implementation is just intellectual masturbation?" Dr. Rodriguez left. "I was a bit more diplomatic than that, but yes. Maya, you've spent 2 years proving that BloomBox works. Now you need resources to make it available to the communities that need it. Sometimes that means partnering with people whose motivations aren't identical to yours. But what if he tries to change the mission? What if he wants to focus only on affluent customers who can afford premium pricing? Then you fight him. Maya, you still control 60% of the company. You still make the strategic decisions. And you have something Kevin O'Leary needs: deep knowledge of your target market and the relationships you've built with community organizations. He needs you as much as you need his money." Maya wasn't entirely convinced, but Dr. Rodriguez's words carried the weight of someone who'd spent decades navigating the gap between academic ideals and real-world implementation. After they hung up, Maya opened her laptop and began drafting an email to O'Leary's assistant, outlining her vision for how the investment should be deployed. The flight back to New York was turbulent, which seemed appropriate given Maya's mental state. She'd upgraded herself to first class using the last available credit on her American Express card, a small act of defiance against her own anxiety about the future. If she was going to second-guess every decision for the next 6 hours, she might as well do it with extra legroom and free drinks. The woman sitting next to her was reading a business magazine with O'Leary on the cover, which felt like the universe's idea of subtle comedy.
Maya found herself studying his photograph, trying to reconcile the television persona with the man who'd just become her business partner. On screen, O'Leary played the role of the ruthless capitalist, the investor who cared only about returns. But Maya had seen something else in his eyes during their negotiation: genuine curiosity about whether her business model could actually work. By the time the plane landed at JFK, Maya had filled 12 pages of her notebook with implementation plans, marketing strategies, and operational frameworks for scaling BloomBox. The adrenaline of the television taping had worn off, replaced by the sobering reality of actually building a business with $200,000 and a partner who expected quarterly returns. Brooklyn felt smaller when she returned, as if her apartment had physically contracted while she was away. Agnes was thriving. The lettuce had grown visibly in just the 3 days Maya had been gone, and the tomato seedlings were showing their first true leaves. But the space that had felt like a laboratory now felt like a child's bedroom, inadequate for the work that lay ahead. Jessica was waiting in Maya's building lobby, holding a bottle of champagne and wearing the grin of someone who'd been following the news coverage. "You're famous," Jessica announced, holding up her phone. There are already 3 articles about the urban farming entrepreneur who impressed Kevin O'Leary. The Business Insider piece has been shared 8,000 times. Maya felt a strange disconnect from the person being described in the headlines. Urban farming entrepreneur Maya Hartwell secures $200K investment on Shark Tank. Food tech startup BloomBox aims to revolutionize urban agriculture. Young entrepreneurs' mission to end food deserts attracts major investment. "This is surreal," Maya said, scrolling through the coverage. 3 days ago, my parents thought this was a hobby. Now I'm a food tech visionary, according to Forbes.
Jessica popped the champagne cork in Maya's tiny kitchen, the sound echoing off the walls like a celebration. "That's how it works, Maya. Nobody believes in you until suddenly everyone does. The trick is remembering who you are in between those 2 moments." They sat on Maya's couch, drinking champagne from coffee mugs and watching Agnes grow under her LED lights. Maya told Jessica about the taping, about O'Leary's offer, about her parents' sudden enthusiasm for her previously impractical business plan. "So, what's your first move?" Jessica asked. Maya pulled out her notebook, pages now filled with plans and concerns in equal measure. Hire an operations manager, set up real manufacturing partnerships, start building inventory, figure out how to scale customer support. She paused, staring at Agnes, "And somehow do all of that while staying true to why I started BloomBox in the first place." Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Maya, this is Kevin O'Leary. Congratulations on the media coverage. My team will be in touch tomorrow about next steps. Looking forward to building something profitable together." Maya showed the message to Jessica, who whistled low. "Well, there's no backing out now." Did I make the right choice, taking money from someone who sees this as just another investment opportunity? Jessica considered the questions seriously, swirling champagne in her mug. "Maya, remember when you first told me about BloomBox? You said you wanted to prove that business could be both profitable and meaningful. Well, now you get to prove it. O'Leary gave you the resources, but you still control the vision." Maya's laptop chimed with an email notification. Dr. Rodriguez had forwarded her a message from Carmen, the director of the Harlem Community Center where they'd installed their first BloomBox pilot. "Maya, I don't know if you'll see this since you're probably super busy being famous now, but I wanted you to know 3 families have asked if they can buy their own BloomBox units to take home, not for grants or programs, but with their own money. They want to pay full price because they've seen how much their kids love the fresh vegetables and they want to keep growing food at home. I thought you should know that your business model might work even better than you thought." Maya read the message twice, then showed it to Jessica. Carmen's word felt like validation from the universe, proof that BloomBox could serve its intended mission while building a sustainable business. Families in food deserts weren't just grateful recipients of charity programs. They were potential customers who valued fresh food enough to prioritize it in their household budgets.
That's your answer, Jessica said after reading the email. O'Leary gave you capital, but Carmen just proved your market. You don't have to choose between doing good and doing well. You can do both. Maya felt something settle in her chest, a quiet confidence she hadn't experienced since walking into her parents' dining room with her business plan. She looked around her small apartment, at Agnes growing steadily in the corner, at the folding table that had served as her office for 2 years, and at the stock of rejection letters she'd kept as reminders of how many people had to say no before one person said yes. Tomorrow, she'd start building the infrastructure to scale BloomBox from a prototype in a Brooklyn apartment to a company that could serve communities across the country. She'd hire employees, negotiate manufacturing contracts, develop distribution channels, and probably make dozens of mistakes along the way. But tonight, she was going to sit in her tiny apartment, drink champagne from a coffee mug, and watch lettuce grow under LED lights while her best friend reminded her that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is prove that caring about people and making money aren't mutually exclusive concepts.
Maya's phone buzzed with another text, this time from her brother David. Saw the news coverage. Dad's telling everyone at the country club that his daughter is the next big thing in agricultural technology. Pretty sure he's already forgotten calling it a lemonade stand. Proud of you, sis. Maya laughed, showing Jessica the message. Her family's sudden conversion from skepticism to pride would have felt patronizing if it weren't so predictably human. People loved success stories, especially when they could claim some connection to the protagonist. But as Maya sat in her apartment, surrounded by the evidence of 2 years spent believing in something everyone else thought was impossible, she realized that her family's approval, delayed though it was, actually mattered less than she'd expected. The validation she had been seeking from her parents, from investors, from anyone who might take her seriously, had been replaced by something more durable. Proof that her idea worked, that her target market existed, and that she could build something meaningful while building something profitable. Agnes hummed quietly in the corner, her LED lights cycling through their programmed spectrum, nurturing vegetables that no one had paid for yet, but that demonstrated every day that fresh food could grow anywhere, for anyone, if someone cared enough to make it happen. Maya raised her coffee mug in a toast to the lettuce. Here's to proving everyone wrong, including myself. 6 months after the Shark Tank episode aired, Maya's life had become an elaborate juggling act performed in a language she was still learning to speak. Her apartment now contained 3 BloomBox prototypes in various stages of development, a professional-grade camera setup for product demonstration videos, and enough business books to stock a small library. She'd moved her bed into the living room to make space for inventory, which meant she fell asleep each night to the gentle humming of LED growing systems and woke up to the smell of fresh herbs. The first hire had been Marcus Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen downstairs, though the coincidence had felt like a good omen. Marcus was a former operations manager at a sustainable packaging company who'd spent 5 years figuring out how to scale environmentally conscious products without sacrificing quality or mission. He was also the first person Maya had met who could translate her vision into spreadsheets that Kevin O'Leary would actually read. The key, Marcus explained during their first official business meeting in what Maya now generously called her home office, is proving unit economics at small scale before we worry about massive growth. O'Leary isn't wrong about focusing on direct customers first. We need to understand what people will actually pay for before we can figure out how to serve people who can't pay full price. Maya had initially bristled at this approach, seeing it as abandoning the communities that needed BloomBox most. But Marcus helped her understand that sustainable social impact required sustainable business practices. You can't serve low-income communities long-term if the company goes bankrupt short-term, he had pointed out with the patience of someone who had had this conversation with mission-driven entrepreneurs before. The manufacturing partnership had taken 3 months to negotiate. Maya had visited factories in Ohio, North Carolina, and Southern California, learning the intricate dance of balancing quality, cost, and scalability. She'd settled on a facility outside Cleveland that specialized in electronic components for agricultural equipment, a company called Precision Ag Systems that understood both the technical requirements and the regulatory landscape for food-growing devices. Your design is elegant,
said Jennifer Walsh, the head engineer at Precision Ag, examining Maya's latest prototype. Most hydroponic systems are either incredibly simple or unnecessarily complex. You found the sweet spot, sophisticated enough to optimize growing conditions, simple enough for a customer to operate without a manual.
The manufacturing minimum order quantity was 500 units, which represented nearly half of Maya's initial investment. It was a terrifying leap from hand-building prototypes in her apartment to committing to commercial-scale production. Maya spent 3 sleepless nights running calculations, checking and rechecking the math that would determine whether BloomBox became a real business or an expensive mistake. Kevin O'Leary had been surprisingly supportive during the manufacturing negotiations, though his version of support often felt like being questioned by a very sophisticated prosecutor. Their weekly check-in calls followed a predictable pattern. Maya would provide updates on progress, O'Leary would identify potential risks she hadn't considered, and they'd debate implementation strategies with the intensity of people arguing about the fate of the world. Maya, manufacturing is where startups go to die, O'Leary said during one particularly intense call. Quality control, supply chain management, inventory management. These aren't glamorous parts of business, but they're what separates successful companies from good ideas that run out of money. I know that, Maya replied, though she was learning that knowing something intellectually and experiencing it operationally were vastly different things. That's why I hired Marcus, why I'm working with an established manufacturer, why I'm starting with conservative inventory levels. Conservative inventory levels don't build businesses. They just postpone the moment when you find out whether your business actually works. O'Leary's bluntness could be frustrating, but Maya had come to appreciate his ability to identify weak points in her reasoning before they became expensive problems. He'd been right about the importance of direct customer sales. The community center installations had generated enthusiasm, but not revenue, while the handful of families who'd purchased BloomBox units at full price had become her most valuable source of feedback about product development and customer support needs. The second hire was Deanna Santos, a customer success specialist who spent 7 years helping people navigate complex technology purchases at companies ranging from solar panel installations to home security systems. Deanna had an almost supernatural ability to translate technical specifications into language that made sense to people who just wanted to grow fresh vegetables for their families. Most of your customers aren't going to care about pH optimization or nutrient solution ratios. They care about whether their kids will eat the lettuce and whether the system will keep working without constant attention. Your marketing needs to focus on outcomes, not features. Deanna's insight led to a complete overhaul of BloomBox's positioning. Instead of emphasizing the sophisticated hydroponic technology, Maya's new marketing materials focused on practical benefits. Fresh vegetables year-round for less than $50 per month. No soil, no weeds, no guesswork. From setup to harvest in under 30 days. The shift in messaging immediately improved conversion rates from Maya's website, but more importantly, it helped her understand that BloomBox's value proposition wasn't about agricultural technology. It was about food security, convenience, and the satisfaction of growing something yourself. The first major order came from an unexpected source, a network of senior living facilities in Arizona whose residents wanted to continue gardening despite mobility limitations and desert growing conditions. The facility's activities directors had seen the Shark Tank episode and realized that BloomBox could provide both nutritional benefits and therapeutic activity for residents who'd spent decades tending traditional gardens. It's perfect for our population, explained Sarah Martinez, activities director at Desert Springs Senior Community. Our residents love the daily routine of checking their plants, they're eating more fresh vegetables, and it's given them something to talk about with their grandchildren when they visit. We want to order 20 more units. The senior living market hadn't been part of Maya's original business plan, but it demonstrated something Marcus had been trying to tell her. Successful businesses often grow by following their customers rather than sticking rigidly to initial assumptions about target markets. The order from Desert Springs led to conversations with other senior living facilities, which led to interest from therapeutic programs serving people with disabilities, which led to inquiries from rehabilitation centers incorporating horticultural therapy into their treatment programs. Maya found herself serving markets she'd never imagined while staying true to her core mission of making fresh food accessible to underserved communities. By month 8, BloomBox had sold 347 units across 12 states, generated $284,000 in revenue, and achieved the quarterly profitability targets that had seemed impossible when O'Leary first proposed them. More importantly, Maya had learned to see her business as a complex ecosystem rather than a single product serving a single market. The breakthrough with municipal contracts came through Dr. Rodriguez's connections at Columbia. The university's Urban Studies Department was partnering with the city of Newark on a pilot program to address food insecurity in public housing developments. The program had grant funding for innovative approaches, but required solutions that could demonstrate both social impact and economic sustainability. Maya, this could be exactly what you've been working toward, Dr. Rodriguez said during their monthly coffee meeting. A chance to serve the communities you care most about, but within a framework that proves your business model can scale. The Newark pilot program would install BloomBox units in common areas of 12 public housing buildings, providing fresh vegetables for residents while creating opportunities for community engagement and education. But unlike charity programs Maya had seen fail when funding dried up, the Newark initiative included a pathway to self-sufficiency. After 2 years of grant support, the Housing Authority would take over operational costs, using money saved on reduced healthcare expenses and improved resident satisfaction. "It's brilliant," Marcus said when Maya showed him the program details. "They're essentially treating BloomBox as preventative healthcare infrastructure. The cost of providing fresh vegetables is offset by reduced spending on nutrition-related health problems." Maya spent 3 weeks in Newark, working with community organizers, public health officials, and residents to understand how BloomBox could be integrated into the complex social and economic ecosystem of public housing. She met families who were spending 40% of their income on food, but still couldn't access fresh vegetables regularly. She met children who'd never seen a tomato plant growing, elderly residents who remembered victory gardens from their childhood, teenagers who were excited about the possibility of learning agricultural skills. The conversations in Newark reminded Maya why she'd started BloomBox in the first place. The technology was important, the business model was essential, but the real value was in dignity, giving people the ability to grow their own fresh food rather than depending on charity or accepting that healthy eating was a luxury they couldn't afford. The Newark contract was worth $340,000 over 3 years, with potential for expansion to other cities if the pilot program demonstrated measurable outcomes. It was BloomBox's largest deal to date, but more importantly, it proved that Maya's original vision of serving low-income communities could coexist with O'Leary's demands for profitability. "I have to admit," O'Leary said during their celebration call after the Newark contract was finalized, "I didn't think you could make the community partnership model work financially, but you've created something I've never seen before, a social program that pays for itself." Maya felt a satisfaction deeper than financial success. She'd proven to herself, to her family, to her investors, and to the community she served that feeding people and making money weren't competing objectives. They were complementary strategies for building something sustainable. By the end of year 1, BloomBox employed 12 people, operated from a 4,000-square-foot facility in Long Island City, and had waiting lists for both individual customers and community partnerships. Maya had moved into a real apartment in Park Slope, though she kept Agnes in the corner of her new home office as a reminder of where everything had started. The growth had been exhilarating and exhausting in equal measure. Maya had learned to read financial statements, negotiate manufacturing contracts, manage employees, and navigate the regulatory landscape for food-related businesses.
She'd given keynote speeches at conferences about sustainable agriculture, appeared on 3 more television shows, and been featured on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine as one of 30 under 30 social entrepreneurs changing the world. But the moment that felt most like victory happened on a Thursday afternoon in November, almost exactly 2 years after that disastrous Sunday dinner with her parents. Maya was visiting the Newark installation to check on the pilot program when she encountered Mrs. Washington, not the community center director from Harlem, but Dorothy Washington, a 74-year-old resident of the Roseville Gardens housing complex who'd been skeptical about the fancy growing machines when they were first installed. "I didn't think this contraption would work," Mrs. Washington told Maya, gesturing toward the BloomBox unit that now occupied a corner of the community room. "Looked too complicated, too modern. I've been growing things in soil for 60 years. Maya waited, recognizing the tone of someone building toward a larger point. "But these tomatoes," Mrs. Washington continued, holding up a cherry tomato that was perfectly red and round, "they taste like the ones my grandmother grew in Mississippi, not like those hard things from the grocery store. And my great-granddaughter, she comes over every day after school to check on her lettuce, asks me questions about how plants grow, wants to know if we can get one of these machines for our apartment." Mrs. Washington bit into the cherry tomato, and Maya watched her face change the way faces always changed when people tasted vegetables that had been harvested hours rather than weeks earlier. "I wanted to thank you," Mrs. Washington said, "not just for the machine, but for understanding that we don't need charity, we need tools. There's a difference." Maya felt tears she hadn't expected. After 2 years of pitch meetings and business plans and profitability analyses, Mrs. Washington had articulated BloomBox's value proposition more clearly than any marketing material Maya had ever written. Tools, not charity. Dignity through self-sufficiency. The Newark pilot program was exceeding all projections. Residents were eating more fresh vegetables, children were learning about nutrition and agriculture, healthcare costs were measurably decreasing, and community engagement was up across all metrics. But more importantly, people were taking ownership of their food security in ways that traditional food assistance programs had never achieved. The beautiful thing about this model, explained Dr. Jennifer Williams, the public health researcher evaluating the Newark program, is that it creates positive feedback loops. People feel good about growing their own food, so they eat more vegetables, so their health improves, so they have more energy to engage with community activities, so the social cohesion of the housing development improves. It's like dropping a stone in a pond. The ripples keep expanding. Maya had started tracking those ripples. Families who used BloomBox units were more likely to cook meals at home, which improved nutrition and saved money. Children who helped tend the growing systems performed better in science classes and were more likely to choose healthy snacks. Adults who participated in community growing programs reported feeling more connected to their neighbors and more optimistic about their living situations. The data was compelling, but the stories were transformative.
Kevin O'Leary had been right about one thing. Focusing on direct paying customers first had been essential for building a sustainable business. But Maya had been right about something too. The direct paying customers weren't just affluent families looking for convenient ways to grow fresh vegetables. They were communities that had been underserved by traditional food systems and were willing to invest in solutions that gave them control over their own food security. "I have to admit something," O'Leary said during one of their quarterly review calls. "When I first invested in BloomBox, I thought you were a smart kid with an idealistic business plan that would either pivot toward more profitable markets or fail completely. I didn't expect you to prove that serving underserved communities could be more profitable than serving affluent ones." Maya was reviewing sales data while they talked, numbers that still seemed surreal. BloomBox's customer acquisition cost was lower for community-based sales than individual consumer sales because community organizations provided built-in distribution networks and customer support systems. Retention rates were higher because BloomBox units in community settings were maintained by groups rather than individuals, reducing technical support needs. And expansion was faster because satisfied communities became ambassadors for the product in ways that individual customers rarely did. It turns out, Maya said, that people who need something are better customers than people who just want something. The insight had implications beyond BloomBox. Maya had started speaking at business schools and entrepreneurship conferences about what she called necessity-driven markets, customer segments that had been overlooked by traditional businesses because their purchasing power was underestimated, but that represented enormous opportunities for companies willing to understand their actual needs and constraints. The key, Maya explained to a roomful of MBA students at Wharton, is designing for constraints rather than trying to remove them. Instead of creating a premium product and then figuring out how to make it affordable, we started with the assumption that our customers had limited money, limited space, and limited technical expertise. Those constraints forced us to innovate in ways that actually made the product better for everyone. The speaking engagements had led to consulting opportunities with other social entrepreneurs, advisory roles with impact investors, and invitations to join boards focused on sustainable food systems. Maya was building influence beyond BloomBox, becoming a voice in conversations about how business could address social problems profitably. But the work that felt most important happened in places like Newark, where Mrs. Washington was teaching her great-granddaughter how to transplant seedlings, and Phoenix, where residents were planning next year's farmers market, and Detroit, where a group of teenagers had started a business growing specialty herbs for local restaurants using BloomBox technology. These weren't customers in the traditional sense. They were partners in building a food system that prioritized access and dignity alongside profit and efficiency. They were proof that Maya's original intuition had been correct. The most revolutionary thing a business could do was treat people as collaborators rather than consumers. 2 years after that Sunday dinner, Maya's parents had become her biggest advocates, though their support now came with the slight embarrassment of people who'd been publicly wrong about something important. Gerald had started introducing Maya at his law firm's social events as "my daughter, the entrepreneur," while Patricia had joined the board of a local food bank and spoke knowledgeably about urban agriculture at her charity galas. "I have to ask," her mother said during a family dinner, at the same mahogany table where Maya had first presented her business plan, "what made you so sure this would work when everyone else thought it was impractical?" Maya looked around the dining room, remembering how small and uncertain she'd felt the last time she'd sat in this chair with a folder of dreams and projections. Now the dining room looked smaller, though she felt larger, not because of success or recognition, but because she'd learned that the distance between impossible and inevitable was often just persistence applied to the right problem. "I wasn't sure it would work," Maya said honestly, "but I was sure it needed to work, and sometimes that's enough." David, now a senior at Wharton, was home for Thanksgiving break and had spent the weekend asking Maya detailed questions about BloomBox's business model for a case study he was writing. Somewhere between Sunday dinner dismissal and Thanksgiving celebration, her younger brother had decided his sister might know something about business after all. "The thing I don't understand is how you knew to focus on community partnerships instead of just selling to individual consumers. That strategy isn't in any business school textbook I've read."
Maya smiled, remembering Mrs. Chen from her old apartment building, counting out exact change for wilted vegetables. "I didn't learn it from textbooks. I learned it from paying attention to people who needed what I was trying to build." The conversation continued through dessert, her family asking questions about manufacturing, distribution, scaling, and all the practical details they dismissed as impossible 2 years earlier. Maya answered their questions, but part of her mind was elsewhere. In Newark with Mrs. Washington, in Phoenix with the senior living residents, in Detroit with the teenagers planning their herb business. Success felt different than she'd expected. It wasn't the validation she thought she needed from her family or investors or the business press. It was the quiet satisfaction of seeing BloomBox units humming in community centers across the country, producing fresh food for people who'd been told that healthy eating was a luxury they couldn't afford. That night, alone in her childhood bedroom, Maya called Dr. Rodriguez to share the family dinner conversation. "You know what I realized tonight?" Maya said. "My parents keep asking me how I knew BloomBox would be successful, but they're asking the wrong question. The right question is how I knew it was worth trying, even if it failed." Dr. Rodriguez laughed. "And what's the answer to that question?"
Maya looked out her bedroom window at her mother's perfectly manicured garden, beautiful but purely ornamental, requiring weekly professional maintenance to stay magazine perfect. Tomorrow, she'd drive back to the city, back to her office where 12 people were building a company that proved food could be both beautiful and functional, both profitable and meaningful. But the numbers Maya treasured most weren't on any financial statement. BloomBox installations had produced over 2.4 million servings of fresh vegetables for people who previously had limited access to healthy food. Children who'd grown up thinking vegetables came from cans were learning to identify different varieties of lettuce and herbs. Adults who'd spent decades accepting that fresh food was expensive were discovering they could grow restaurant-quality produce for less than they'd been spending on processed alternatives. The company's success had attracted attention from larger agricultural companies interested in acquiring BloomBox, private equity firms wanting to scale the model internationally, and impact investors looking to replicate the approach in other sectors. Maya had fielded dozens of acquisition offers, some worth enough money to make her independently wealthy for life. "But here's what I don't understand," said Tom Harrison, CEO of Agritech Solutions, during their most recent acquisition discussion. "You've built something valuable that could be scaled globally with the right capital and distribution networks. Why stay small when you could transform food systems worldwide?" Maya had sat in Harrison's corner office, surrounded by awards and photographs celebrating Agritech's success in maximizing crop yields for commercial farming operations, and felt the familiar disconnect between seeing BloomBox as a product versus understanding it as a relationship. Because, Maya had explained, global scale often requires sacrificing the community partnerships that make BloomBox actually work. You can manufacture and distribute growing systems anywhere, but you can't manufacture trust or distribute dignity. Those things have to be built one community at a time. Harrison had looked at her with the expression of someone encountering a business philosophy they couldn't quite categorize. "But Maya, think about the impact you could have with our resources. Instead of serving thousands of people, you could serve millions." Or, Maya had replied, "I could serve thousands of people really well, and they could serve millions of people through the networks and relationships they build. Sometimes the most scalable approach is the one that doesn't look scalable at first." The conversation had crystallized something Maya had been thinking about since BloomBox's early success: the difference between scaling a product and scaling an impact. Products could be manufactured, distributed, and sold through traditional channels. But impact required relationships, understanding, and ongoing collaboration, things that couldn't be automated or outsourced. BloomBox had grown through what Marcus called community-driven expansion. Installations that succeeded in one location became models for neighboring communities, creating organic demand that spread through existing social networks rather than expensive marketing campaigns. A successful program in Newark led to interest from public housing authorities in Camden and Trenton. A pilot project in Phoenix senior living facilities generated inquiries from retirement communities across Arizona and Nevada. "It's like the opposite of viral marketing," explained Diana Santos, now BloomBox's VP of Customer Success, during a presentation to potential investors. "Instead of trying to reach as many people as possible as quickly as possible, we focus on creating deep, meaningful experiences that people want to share with their communities. Growth is slower, but more sustainable, because each new installation is supported by existing relationships rather than depending on advertising or promotional campaigns." The approach had made BloomBox profitable earlier than anyone had expected, including Kevin O'Leary, whose quarterly check-ins had evolved from skeptical interrogations to collaborative strategy sessions. O'Leary had become genuinely invested in BloomBox's mission, using his media platform to advocate for policy changes that would make fresh food more accessible in underserved communities. "Maya taught me something I didn't expect to learn," O'Leary said during a CNBC interview about impact investing. "The most profitable businesses aren't always the ones that maximize short-term returns. Sometimes they're the ones that create long-term value by solving real problems for people who really need solutions. The interview had generated significant media attention, but Maya was more interested in a conversation she'd had the previous week with Jessica, who'd been promoted to head of marketing at her sustainable fashion startup and was dealing with her own questions about balancing mission and growth.
I keep thinking about something you said years ago, Jessica told Maya over coffee at their old Park Slopes spot, which had somehow managed to survive gentrification while adapting to changing neighborhood demographics, about the difference between wanting something and needing something. I think I'm finally starting to understand what you meant. Jessica's company had been successful selling sustainable clothing to environmentally conscious consumers who could afford to pay premium prices for ethically made products. But she'd been exploring ways to make sustainable fashion accessible to people who needed affordable clothing, not people who wanted to make environmental statements. The challenge, Jessica explained, is that our current business model depends on customers who see sustainability as a lifestyle choice. But people who actually need affordable clothing care more about durability and cost than environmental impact. It's like we're solving the wrong problem for the wrong people. Maya nodded, recognizing the tension Jessica was describing. That's exactly what I learned with BloomBox. I started by thinking about people who would want to grow their own vegetables, urban gardening enthusiasts, environmental advocates, people interested in food sustainability. But the real market was people who needed fresh vegetables and couldn't access them any other way. So how do you shift from want-based customers to need-based customers without losing the mission that made the company meaningful in the first place? It was a question Maya had wrestled with for years, and one she'd been thinking about as BloomBox continued growing and evolving. You don't shift, she said. You expand. The want-based customers help you prove the concept and generate the revenue you need to serve need-based customers. But the need-based customers are where you create real impact. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Rodriguez. Saw the news about the Detroit expansion? Remember when you thought 15 installations was ambitious? Proud of how far you've come. The Detroit expansion was BloomBox's most complex project to date, a partnership with the city government, local nonprofits, and community development organizations to install BloomBox units in 200 locations across neighborhoods that had been designated as food deserts. The project would serve over 15,000 residents while creating jobs for local people who'd be trained to maintain and support the installations. Detroit is different from our other markets, explained LaToya Williams, BloomBox's new director of community partnerships and a Detroit native who'd spent years working on urban agriculture initiatives in the city. There's already a strong culture of growing your own food here. People have been turning vacant lots into gardens for decades. BloomBox isn't replacing that culture, it's expanding it into spaces where traditional gardening isn't possible. The Detroit project had required Maya to think about BloomBox's role in community development beyond just food access. The installations would be maintained by local residents who'd receive training and ongoing support, creating employment opportunities while building community capacity for food production. Children would learn about nutrition and agriculture in schools, while their parents learned about entrepreneurship and small business development through programs connected to the installations. It's like economic development through food security, explained Marcus Chen, who'd been promoted to COO and was overseeing the Detroit expansion. Instead of just providing fresh vegetables, we're creating pathways for people to build economic stability around food production. The complexity of the Detroit project reflected how much BloomBox had evolved since Maya's first prototype in her Brooklyn apartment. The company now provided not just growing systems, but comprehensive support services, training programs, maintenance services, business development assistance, and community organizing resources. BloomBox had become less a product company than a platform for communities to build their own food security infrastructure. Maya often thought about the journey from that first prototype to BloomBox's current incarnation while walking through the company's warehouse, where hundreds of units were assembled, tested, and prepared for shipment to communities across the country. Each unit represented not just manufacturing and logistics, but relationships with community organizations, training programs for local residents, ongoing support services, and connections to larger networks of people working on food justice issues. Agnes still sat in Maya's office,
5 years older, and still producing perfect lettuce under her LED lights. Maya had turned down multiple offers from agricultural museums wanting to display the original BloomBox prototype, explaining that Agnes was still working and intended to keep working as long as her systems functioned properly. She's not a historical artifact, Maya explained to the curator from the Smithsonian who'd called about acquiring Agnes for an exhibit on social entrepreneurship. She's a daily reminder that innovation starts by paying attention to problems that other people think are unsolvable.
The Smithsonian conversation had led to an invitation for Maya to speak at a conference on technology and social justice at Georgetown University, where she found herself on a panel with entrepreneurs, activists, and academics discussing how technological innovation could address systemic inequalities. The problem with most technology for good initiatives, explained Dr. Robert Johnson, a professor of sociology who'd spent decades studying urban poverty, is that they're designed by people who don't experience the problems they're trying to solve. The solutions end up addressing symptoms rather than root causes. Maya understood Dr. Johnson's critique, having encountered numerous well-intentioned programs that failed because they were designed without input from the communities they claimed to serve. But she'd also learned that the solution wasn't to avoid technology altogether. It was to design technology in partnership with communities rather than for them. BloomBox works, Maya explained to the conference audience, not because it's sophisticated technology, but because it was developed through relationships with people who needed it to work. We didn't start with a technology and look for applications. We started with a problem and developed technology to address it. The distinction had become central to Maya's thinking about entrepreneurship and social impact. Too many companies started with impressive technology and then searched for problems to solve, creating solutions that were technically elegant but practically irrelevant. Successful social enterprises started with human needs and then developed whatever technology was required to address those needs effectively. After the conference, Maya was approached by a group of graduate students who were working on various social impact projects, an app to help immigrants navigate government services, a platform to connect elderly people with local volunteers, a system to help low-income families access educational resources. How do you know if you're solving a real problem or just building something that makes you feel good about solving problems? Asked Maria, a student whose immigration services app had received enthusiastic feedback from social workers but limited adoption from actual immigrants. Maya recognized the question, having wrestled with it herself during BloomBox's early development. The people who need your solution should be involved in designing it, testing it, and improving it. If you're building something for people rather than with people, you're probably solving the wrong problem. She thought about Mrs. Washington in Newark, whose skeptical questions about BloomBox's complexity had led to design improvements that made the system easier to operate, about the teenagers in Detroit who'd suggested modifications that made the units more suitable for small apartments, about the senior living residents in Phoenix who'd identified features that would make the systems more accessible for people with mobility limitations. Real problems demand real collaboration. If you're the only person excited about your solution, that's usually a sign that you're not addressing a genuine need. The conversation with the students continued over coffee, ranging from the challenges of measuring social impact to the difficulty of balancing mission and financial sustainability. Maya found herself sharing lessons she'd learned not just from BloomBox's success, but from the failures and false starts that had preceded it. I spent 2 years building prototypes before I understood what problem I was actually trying to solve. I thought I was developing technology to make urban agriculture more efficient, but I was actually creating a tool for communities to achieve food security and economic independence. The technology was just the means, not the end. Maya's phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "Saw the article in the Times about the Detroit project. Your father and I are so proud of what you've built. Dinner Sunday? We want to hear about the next phase." The next phase was something Maya had been thinking about constantly as BloomBox approached its 5th anniversary. The company was successful, financially sustainable, and growing steadily.
But Maya was increasingly interested in questions beyond BloomBox's immediate business objectives, questions about how food systems could be redesigned to prioritize access and sustainability, how communities could build economic resilience around local food production, how technology could support rather than replace human relationships and social networks. I think we're at an inflection point, Maya explained to her leadership team during their quarterly strategy retreat. We can continue growing BloomBox as a successful company, serving more and more communities, or we can think about how BloomBox becomes a model for other entrepreneurs working on other problems in other sectors. Marcus leaned forward, intrigued. What would that look like practically?
Maya pulled out a notebook filled with ideas she'd been developing for months. What if BloomBox becomes a platform for community-driven economic development? Not just food security, but energy security through solar installations, housing security through cooperative ownership models, economic security through local business development networks. Diana nodded thoughtfully. So, BloomBox installations become anchors for broader community resilience programs? Exactly. Food is often the entry point, but the relationships and infrastructure we build around food can support other community needs as well. The conversation continued through the afternoon, exploring possibilities that felt both ambitious and logical given BloomBox's evolution from product company to community development platform. Maya realized she was describing not just BloomBox's future, but a model for how entrepreneurship could address systemic problems through sustained engagement with communities rather than technological solutions deployed from outside. That evening, Maya walked along the East River, watching the sun set behind Manhattan's skyline and thinking about the distance she'd traveled from that first Sunday dinner with her parents. The young woman who'd sat at the mahogany table with a folder full of dreams had believed that proving her business plan's viability would be the hardest part of building BloomBox. She'd been wrong, of course. Building the business had been relatively straightforward compared to the ongoing work of maintaining relationships with hundreds of community partners, supporting thousands of customers, employing more than 100 people, and staying true to a mission that evolved as the company grew. But Maya had learned that the most meaningful work was also the most sustainable work. BloomBox succeeded not because Maya had found the perfect business model, but because the company had remained connected to the human needs that had inspired its creation. Every installation, every customer interaction, every partnership decision was guided by the question, does this help communities achieve greater food security and economic independence? The question had led BloomBox to opportunities Maya never could have imagined when she was mixing nutrient solutions in her Brooklyn apartment. It had also kept the company focused on impact rather than just growth, on relationships rather than just transactions, on long-term sustainability rather than short-term profits. Maya's phone rang as she reached her apartment building. The caller ID showed Kevin O'Leary. Maya, I just got off a call with the Detroit mayor's office about the expansion project. They're talking about BloomBox as a model for other cities dealing with food desert issues. I wanted to call and tell you something I should have said years ago. Maya waited, curious about O'Leary's usually reflective tone. When I first invested in BloomBox, I thought you were naive about business. I thought the social mission stuff was fine as long as it didn't interfere with profitability. I was wrong. The social mission isn't separate from the business success. It is the business success. You've built something I've never seen before, and I wanted you to know that investing in BloomBox has been one of the most rewarding decisions of my career. Maya felt tears she hadn't expected. O'Leary's recognition meant something different than her parents' eventual pride or the media coverage of BloomBox's success. It was acknowledgement from someone who understood business deeply that Maya had been right about something important, that serving people and generating profits weren't competing objectives, but complementary strategies for building sustainable enterprises. Thank you, Kevin. That means more to me than you know. So, what's next? I assume you're not planning to coast on BloomBox's success.
Maya looked up at her building, where Agnes waited in her office, still producing perfect lettuce after 5 years of continuous operation. I'm thinking about how to help other entrepreneurs build businesses like BloomBox, companies that solve real problems for people who really need solutions. Maybe an accelerator program, maybe an investment fund, maybe just a network of people who want to prove that business can be both profitable and meaningful. Count me in, O'Leary said without hesitation. Whatever you build next, I want to be part of it. After hanging up, Maya stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer, looking up at the building where she'd started BloomBox with nothing but conviction and stubbornness. 5 years later, she had a successful company, financial security, recognition in her field, and the satisfaction of knowing that thousands of people had better access to fresh food because she'd refused to accept that her idea was impractical. But more than any of that, Maya had proof that her grandmother Agnes had been right about something important, that the most revolutionary thing anyone could do was plant seeds and tend them with patience, whether those seeds were vegetables growing under LED lights or ideas growing in the space between what seemed impossible and what desperately needed to happen. Maya walked into her building, ready to check on Agnes and start planning the next phase of whatever she was building. Outside, New York hummed with the energy of 8 million people pursuing their own versions of impossible dreams. And somewhere in Newark, Mrs. Washington was probably checking on tomatoes that tasted like the ones her grandmother had grown in Mississippi. And in Detroit, teenagers were learning that growing food could be both rebellion and business. And in Phoenix, elderly residents were planning next season's farmers market. The ripples continued expanding, one community at a time, proving that sometimes the most scalable approach was the one that didn't look scalable at first, and that the difference between impossible and inevitable was often just someone who cared enough to keep trying until caring became profitable. Subscribe to Scarred by Secrets, where silence is never forgotten.